Welcome. This is the lecture for Chapter 35 on externalities. Before we get to a discussion of externalities directly, I want to show you a graphical method of seeing gains from trade, because it'll be very useful in how to analyze trade with externalities. Assume we have only two consumers, Joey and Carrie, and only two goods, Capri Sun and sandwiches. The Edgeworth box is a way of plotting utilities of various combinations of the two products for both people simultaneously. The big difference is that each person has a different origin. I'll show you. Here, for Joey, this looks like the normal graph you've seen before. More of this product, sandwiches, moves up. More Capri Sun moves right. So Joey is happier as he moves to the northeast. Carrie's is the one that is not entirely intuitive. This is a graph just like Joey's, but it's been flipped so it's a mirror image. For Carrie, having 0 of both would be in the top right. The horizontal axis is still Capri Sun, but for Carrie, more is to the left. For Carrie, more sandwiches is down. Now, here are A, B, C, and D, 4 possible initial allocations. Let's look at A. With A, Joey has a whole bunch of sandwiches, but no Capri Sun. Carrie has a whole bunch of Capri Sun, but no sandwiches. Pretty straightforward. Now, when you add, let's look at the graph when you start to add indifference curves. Here we only have Joey. More Capri Suns, more sandwiches. These are his indifference curves. Well, this is utility 2, utility 5, utility 8. Going up to the right makes Joey happier. When we add the indifference curves for Carrie, they bow in the opposite direction because this is a mirror image. For Carrie, these are her indifference curves. This one gets her 2 units of utility. This is a higher indifference curve for her, and this is a higher one. For Carrie, she's happier to the bottom left. Now, let's assume there is some initial endowment. Here, Joey has 2.5 sandwiches and 0.8 Capri Sun. Carrie has, let's see. Okay, there aren't units for her for going in her direction, but she has a lot of Capri Sun and, well, she has some sandwiches. So we start out, for Joey, we are on his utility curve 2. And for Carrie, on her utility curve 5. Now here I've marked it up ahead of time, color coding it to make it a little easier for you. Carrie is in green. Joey is in yellow-orange. Now, what if they moved from this endowment, their initial endowment, let's say they traded. They went from here to here. What would that mean for Joey? Well, ignore the green for the moment. It would mean Joey would be giving up half a sandwich and gaining 4/10 of a Capri Sun. That would put him at this red point, which is a higher indifference curve. Joey would be better off making that trade. Joey would be happier. And let's look how it affects Carrie. For Carrie, it's the same trade, but from the other side. She would give up 0.4 Capri Suns, but gain half a sandwich. That would take her from this indifference curve to a higher one that would run through that point. They would both be better off. This is classic gains from trade. The point of the Edgeworth box is to see that actually moving from this initial endowment to any endowment inside this lozenge shape, any of these points make both people better off. Now, if they move to this point, for example, they'd both be better off, so they would voluntarily do the trade. That doesn't mean that all possibilities for trade are exhausted. That won't happen until you reach this point, where both of their indifference curves are tangent. At that point, there is no possible trade that will make them both better off. That, we call that situation a Pareto optimal outcome, or Pareto efficient. Pareto efficiency. Something is Pareto optimal if it is not possible to change the system without make anyone better off, without making at least one person worse off. Meaning also a Pareto optimal outcome, or a Pareto efficient outcome, is an outcome where it is not possible to make everyone better off. Here, all of these points in here are Pareto improvements. They make both better off. This one point is Pareto optimal. There are no further trades that can make both parties better off. Okay, this leads us to the first welfare theorem of economics. A free market, which is what we just studied, when it reaches equilibrium, is Pareto efficient, meaning there is no other combination of price and quantity that will make everyone better off. The only way to make someone better off would be by making someone else worse off. So a free market in equilibrium is optimal in the sense of maximizing social welfare. So, if the market's competitive, it'll exhaust all the gains from trade. You'll reach the Pareto optimal point, and you can't make things better from that point. However, this simple model of how markets are efficient and welfare maximizing, they maximize the total surplus for the society. It requires some things to be true. There has to be perfect competition. As we've seen in the monopoly case, if there's a monopoly, the monopolist will get monopoly profits, but the extra benefit to the monopolist will be accompanied by a reduction in welfare to the other side of the market, and the net will be a reduction in the wealth of the society. Next, there have to be no transaction costs. In the example of trading sandwiches for Capri Suns, what happens if there was a gigantic tax on those trades? It might make the trades so unattractive that it would not make both sides better off. Third, there has to be full information. People have to know the results of these trades. Frequently in real world markets, that doesn't happen. Have you ever bought something online from Amazon or wherever, and you get it, and then look at it and go, "Oh, this isn't what I thought." Well, that violates the full information assumption. And last, there can be no externalities. We'll get to externalities in a moment. The first welfare theorem, that a free market in equilibrium is Pareto efficient, is the core of a paper, The Use of Knowledge in Society, by F.A. Hayek, Friedrich August von Hayek, published in AER in 1945. AER is American Economic Review. That is arguably the top academic journal for economists in the world. It's a sort of a rumor rule of thumb. If you're an academic economist and you want to get tenure at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, you must have at least one paper accepted in AER. It's not it's the holy grail for economists to get a paper accepted there. All right. Now, Hayek's, let me give you a little background. In the 1930s, there was something called the socialist calculation debate. The Russian Marxist revolution was only 10, 12, 15 years old. There were a good number of people in the West who thought that that was the wave of the future, that centrally planned economies were better, more efficient, and that we couldn't compete with them, we meaning the free market West. Hayek, and so there were a lot of people in the West advocating more government intervention in the economy, not going all the way to Marxism, although some wanted that, but a more interventionist economic policy. Hayek showed, and it was later mathematically proven, that with certain assumptions, it is not possible for a centrally planned economy to reach not just better, but as good an outcome as a free market economy in equilibrium. Good defined here as maximizing social surplus, producer surplus, consumer surplus, as you learned about in principles. The reason is that millions of people, millions of products, millions of prices, millions of people's preferences, all changing from one split second to the next, really is an incredibly complex mathematical problem. You've seen with, let me show you the diagram again. Here, for Joey, one person, two products, you can mathematically solve the optimal combination for this person, given a budget constraint. But imagine doing that for millions and millions of people and millions of products. Finding the Pareto optimal trades between all those people and all those products and all those prices, it can be reduced to a mathematical problem. Millions of equations in millions of unknowns, and all of it changing every millionth of a second. Markets, when they're operating correctly, solve that mathematical problem constantly. That's what equilibrium is. Equilibrium is the solution to that multi-equation problem. For a centrally planned government, a centrally planned economy, to reach as efficient a result, it would also, to do just as good, it would have to solve those same equations in fractions of a second over and over and over. Hayek said that's not just unlikely, it's absolutely impossible, because all of the data needed, all the parameters of all those equations, my preferences for peanut butter versus carburetors, that information is not available to the central planner, even if the central planner had the best interests of the society at heart, which we in economics frequently call the benevolent dictator model. It would not be, and even if the central planner was perfectly benevolent, so would be willing to do what was best for the society, maximizes social welfare, and let's assume that the central planner had infinite computational capacity, could solve any mathematical problem instantly and costlessly. It still wouldn't work, because there's no way to collect all the information in a full economy into one location at one point in time. You know your budget constraint. I don't know it. I know my budget constraint. You don't know it. And our preferences and prices, all these things, this information is diffused throughout society. It does not exist collected into one point. Therefore, no matter your intentions, no matter your computational abilities, no one person or group of people or central node in a system can have enough information to solve that system of equations. It's generally believed, close to 100 years later, that Hayek won the socialist calculation debate over Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, who was sort of the representative of the other side, saying that the economy can be improved by more government intervention. So, a free market in equilibrium is Pareto efficient, assuming these things are true. And there's the rub. In the real world, these things are never perfectly true. In particular, we're going to look at now no externalities. An externality, as you should remember from principles, is a cost or a benefit to a transaction that is incurred by someone who is not a party to the transaction. I decide to buy a gigantic car with really bad gas mileage. Well, driving that around, that's my choice. I made that decision. But driving it around, other people who had no say in the matter are going to be breathing in the fumes that come out the tailpipe. That's a negative externality. A positive externality is a benefit that accrues to someone else who is not a party to the transaction. You decide whether to purchase an education here. But you don't get all the benefit of that education. Other people get some benefit as well. If you choose to become educated, you're going to make the society around you, hopefully, better. Others will benefit from your knowledge. So, examples of negative externalities. pollution, environmental pollution, is a very, very common example of negative externalities. If your neighbors decide to have a loud party, they get the benefit, they get all the benefit to the party, but they don't pay all the cost. You have to pay some of the cost in listening to loud music. Traffic congestion. I get on the road, I'm going to slow other people down, etc. Positive externalities. If you decide to plant a beautiful garden in your front yard, other people in the neighborhood will get some of the benefit. Maybe they're trying to sell their house. The buyer goes through and goes, "Oh, what a lovely neighborhood." You get a little higher sales price. Okay. Externalities generally cause Pareto inefficient outcome, meaning that it should be possible to reallocate things to make everyone better off. The inefficiency comes from either too much of a resource being spent in some activity that causes a negative externality, or too little resources being invested in activity that causes a positive externality. Let's look at an example. Two people, A and B, two commodities, money and smoke, as in cigarette smoke. Both of these people, A and B, like money. Money is a good for both of them. One of them is a smoker, the other is not. For person A, the smoker, more money makes this person happier. More smoking makes this person happier. For person B, more money makes them happier, but more smoke makes this person less happy. Okay, we're going to measure, ignore the endowment issue for a moment. We're going to measure how money, you can measure easily, it's dollars. But how much smoke there is, we will measure on a scale from 0, meaning no smoke, to 1, meaning maximum smoke. Here are the indifference curves for the smoker. Person A. More smoke makes this person happier. More money makes this person happier. These are 3 representative indifference curves, and to the northeast makes this person better off. Now, these are the indifference curves with the same axes for the other person. Person B, more money makes this person happier. So they get to higher indifference curves by going to the southeast. But more smoke, going from here, holding the amount of money constant, takes them to a lower indifference curve, makes them worse off. That's why the curves are bending the other way, because one of these is a good for this person, the other is a bad. Now let's take this graph and make it a mirror image. We're going to flip it. Oh, here we go. Now the origin is down here on the right for this person. More money is to the left. More smoke is still up. So now this person's indifference curves go this way. So better is down to the left. By flipping it, we can create an Edgeworth box that's easy to see. All right, efficient allocations. Let's start here. Let's assume that our initial allocation is, whatever, here. In this case, person A has, ignore this blue point down there, has, you know, a good amount of money, because more of this person is to the right, but this person has a lot of smoke. So this person's on this high blue indifference curve. For person B, this person has more money than person A does. Looks like about 60% of the money. But this smoke is bad. So this person is only on this indifference curve here. What possible trades could there be? Well, it should be fairly obvious. Anything, any allocation of money and smoke inside this area would make both better off. Here are some possible trades. Here I've highlighted person A is the orange indifference curves, person B the red ones. Let's look at different possible starting endowments and trades. Let's assume that we start off here. Person A has half the money, but there's maximum smoke. And this person B has half the money and 0 clean air. Well, this point here is a Pareto optimal trade, where person A would give up about that much smoke and gain that much money. Right now, this person, let me put in the correct color. Right, excuse me, right now, person A is on an indifference curve something like that. By making this trade, person A is better off. Now, for person B, person B would go from that indifference curve to this higher one. Person B would also be better off. And the same thing works if you start with the opposite initial endowment. If you start here, again, they each have half the money, but now there's no smoke. Going there puts person A from that kind of indifference curve up to there. I'm keeping it in red because why not? And for person B, it takes them from that indifference curve up to that one. So no matter who has the initial endowment, person A has all of it, person B has all of it in terms of smoke. Either way, they can negotiate to an equilibrium that is better for both of them. Now, if you plot all of these efficient results, like, let's see, this is one result that is Pareto optimal, the most efficient result, given this initial endowment. Given this initial endowment, the opposite case, that is the most efficient outcome, Pareto optimal. Well, these are two Pareto optimal results, depending on what the initial endowment is. You can plot all of those results for all the different initial endowments. These black dots and the line are all of the Pareto optimal allocations that could be negotiated to, given all the different possible initial endowments. This is called the contract curve. All of this can happen if these trades are possible. What happens if the trades are not possible? What if there's no way that money could be exchanged for smoke? Different people, but it was a nice diagram because it's already color-coded. It's fairly simple. Cigarettes, and instead of money, it's toast. Okay. Gwen, the smoker, has these green indifference curves, so Gwen is happier going that way. Ethel has the red indifference curves. She's happier going that way. Now, let's assume we have this initial endowment. If the public policy is smoking is forbidden, well, that's another way of saying that the smoker can't make a trade to purchase smoke. All of these outcomes in this Edgeworth box would make both sides better off by their definitions of utility, but they can't get to them. This trade, this Pareto improvement, is not possible because you can't purchase the right to smoke. Let's look at the opposite case. Allow unlimited smoking. This is a little less real world, but imagine it's against, instead of being against the law to buy the right to smoke, let's say it's against the law to pay people not to smoke. Well, if you start out here, a Pareto improvement would be for the non-smoker to give money to the smoker to reduce smoking. But that trade can't happen either. And so there's a trade that could make both sides better off. It doesn't happen. The total surplus of the society is not maximized. Here's a third policy option. Give the non-smoker property rights in clean air. So Gwen, the non-smoker, has the right to tell the other person, the smoker, how much they're allowed to smoke, if any. So the smoker has to purchase the right to smoke from the non-smoker. In that case, starting at an allocation of no smoke, they can both be better off by the smoker purchasing some quantity of right to smoke from the non-smoker. Here's the other case. Let's say that Ethel has the right to smoke. Gwen can't say, I won't let you smoke, because that's the atmosphere, in this case, belongs to Ethel. And so Ethel is smoking a whole bunch. If Ethel has the right to sell atmosphere, like sell clean air, then this trade could happen. And they would again be both better off. But that can only happen if the trades are allowed as a matter of public policy. Externality cannot be eliminated with trade if Well, it's forbidden. That's one way. But here's another way. If the property rights are not well defined, if the two people disagree on who has the right, who owns the air, the smoker could believe, I have the right to smoke. This airspace belongs to me. You can't tell me not to smoke, I'll ignore you. But person B, the non-smoker, believes he has the right to clean air. So they don't agree on who should pay the other. Look here. If Gwen owns the air, then the smoker would pay Gwen. Money would go to the non-smoker. But if Ethel, the smoker, owns the air, then the non-smoker would pay the smoker to smoke less. In this case, money would go to the smoker. The direction of the flow of money to reach the Pareto optimal outcome depends on who has the initial property right. If they don't agree on that, then the transaction can't happen. Gains from trade. You can't get those gains from trade if you can't agree on who owns what. In the real world, the inefficiencies induced by externalities are frequently, not always, there are other problems, frequently caused by poorly defined property rights. This is one of the reasons why it's difficult to conduct these kind of trades in the environmental realm. Who owns the lake? Frequently it's not defined. Okay. Ronald Coase, a great economist, lived to be 103. When I was in school at George Mason getting my doctorate, there were some people there, some of my teachers, who knew him. Ronald Coase, very interesting case. He didn't write that many papers, only wrote maybe a dozen important papers, maybe another dozen that were not so important. In a career that long, that's just an insanely small output. And yet of those dozen big papers, he wrote two that each would have earned him a Nobel Prize. He got the Nobel Prize, obviously. Talk about a genius. In his paper, The Problem of Social Costs, published in 1960, he said that if trade in some externality, like cigarette smoke, is possible, and if transaction costs are low, and there's some other assumptions, then bargaining, voluntary trade, will always result in the Pareto optimal outcome, no matter who has the property rights to start with, as long as someone has them. Now, an example. The classic Pigovian approach in econ to externalities has been something like this. Let's say that there's a plant and it puts out pollution, which causes $100 in damage every year. Installing a scrubber to eliminate the pollution would cost the company $90. They don't want to spend the 90. So if they're causing $100 of damage, you impose a tax on them of $100. If installing the scrubber costs 90, the plant will do it to gain the $10 difference. But Suppose that the people living around the plant, who are the ones being harmed, could move away from the plant to end the harm to them. And moving them all away would only cost $40. Silly example, but total cost. Then the socially optimal trade is for the company to pay the people to move away, not to install the scrubber. Let's assume that the company and the people negotiated and came up with a price, I'm just splitting the difference, of $65. Well, then the residents would be better off because it only cost them $40 to move. They got paid $65. The residents would be $25 better off than they were before. They'd take that deal. The firm would also be better off. They would spend $65 to avoid a $90 cost. They also would be better off by $25. So if property rights are clearly defined so that trades can happen and transaction costs are low, then we say they will internalize the externalities. They won't be externalized anymore. Externality, a cost or benefit incurred by someone outside of the transaction. Well, if you can take that cost or benefit and bring it into the transaction so that one of the decision makers, the buyer, the seller, has those costs or those benefits, then they've internalized the externality. There's no more external cost or benefit. And since all of the costs and all of the benefits are taken into consideration by the decision makers, they will make the optimal decision. In this case, this would be the social welfare maximizing, Pareto optimal outcome. Here's another example of internalizing the externality. A law firm is located next to a little business that teaches people how to play the bagpipes, which are very loud and very annoying. One way to internalize this externality, a common one used in corporate America, the law firm could just buy the bagpipe studio. Now, one entity, the law firm, gets all the benefit of teaching people how to play the bagpipes, the money they pay, and also all of the costs having to listen to it. The law firm would have internalized the externality and would choose the profit maximizing level of bagpipe lessons, maybe by changing the hours, only to hours where the law firm was not active. Okay. The Coase theorem again, about the $40 for people to move to get away from the pollution, and that's the social welfare maximizing outcome. But that only works if A and B and C are true and transaction costs are low. Not only do the property rights have to be well defined so that people know who owns what so that they can trade, but the cost of making those trades has to be low. This is the core of what both of these reasons are why they're called Coasean bargains are very difficult to use in environmental situations, especially pollution. What would happen if the property rights were perfectly defined, but instead of one company and 27 people, what if it was one company and 1 million people? Can you imagine how expensive it would be to negotiate that contract when you have one company, but a million people on the other side of the table. Can you imagine trying to get them all to agree? The legal fees would be astronomical. To get that trade done would cost more than the benefit of the trade. And in cases of environmental pollution, this is frequently the case. You know, if I smoke, decades ago I smoked. If I were to smoke one cigarette, you know, a little bit of smoke goes up in the air. Okay. But that smoke, even though it's tiny, would get dispersed eventually through the entire atmosphere of the Earth. The Pareto optimal transaction, the Coasian bargain there, would have to be a bargain between me and all other people on Earth. It obviously can't happen. Also, in environmental situations, you have the compounded problem that the property rights are not well defined. Who owns the air? Who owns the ocean? It's the combination of the two mean that these kinds of Coasian bargains sadly usually can't happen in an environmental context. Now, one way that, so we tend to fall back on just government regulation, which we know does not reach the Pareto optimal outcome. It can't. But if it's better than the current situation, you do it anyway, because the perfect can't occur due to these problems of transaction costs and lack of well-defined property rights. But another approach that sometimes works is government can try to satisfy the assumptions necessary for a Coasian bargain. In the transaction cost example, negotiating one firm with 1 million people, maybe government could reduce the transaction costs so that a Coasian bargain, a Pareto optimal trade could happen. How could that happen? Maybe the 1 million people all live in one city. The mayor could appoint one person to represent, one lawyer to represent and negotiate on behalf of all 1 million people. Well, now you have 2 lawyers, one for the company, one for the 1 million people. They could negotiate an agreement. There are a variety of ways that you can reduce transaction costs and improve the definition, the clarity of property rights. A court can simply assign property rights. 2 people come to court saying, we can't agree on this because I own that lake. No, I own that lake. Somebody else says, nobody owns the lake. The court can rule the lake belongs to you or to you. Done. Now, because the property rights are clarified, a Coasian bargain can occur. Okay, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it.